Good morning. I call this meeting to order. Welcome everyone to the Committee of Adjustment meeting of January 22nd, 2019. My name is Mario Russo, Committee Chair. This is a meeting of the Committee of Adjustment. The Committee of Adjustment is composed of 5 citizen members who are appointed by Brampton City Council. The committee is authorized by the Ontario Planning Act to consider applications for minor variances from the provisions of the City of Brampton zoning bylaw. The committee also considers applications for consent, sometimes referred to as land division applications, which include severing a new lot from an existing lot, a lot addition, easements, mortgages, or leases in excess of 21 years. My first request is to ask those present to ensure that all cell phones and other electronic devices are turned off or placed in a non-audible mode during the meeting. I'd like to introduce the committee members. To my immediate right, member Mr. Ron Chadha. To my far right, member Mr. Richard Nurse. To my immediate left, member Ms. Desiree Doppler. Mr. Robert Crouch is, I believe, joining us, but hasn't arrived as of yet. And my name is, again, Mario Russo. Seated at the table, to the right, we have Ms. Jeannie Myers, Secretary Treasurer of the Committee of Adjustment. And seated near the podium, we have city staff members who will assist the committee today. Staff, can I please get your introductions?
Good morning. My name is Himanshu Katyal, Development Planner.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Elizabeth Corazola. I'm the Manager of Zoning and Sign Bylaw Services.
Morning. My name is Fernie Steiger, Manager, Development Services.
Good morning, Larissa Russell, Development Planner.
Good morning, David Vandenberg, Central Area Planner.
Thank you. Before we consider today's applications, the committee has some procedural matters to take care of. Firstly, the adoption of minutes. Minutes of the meeting held January 8th, 2019. The minutes of the previous meeting are presented in today's agenda. Committee members, are there any questions or concerns with these minutes? Then I seek a motion to approve the minutes of January 8th, 2019 as presented. Motion to approve by Mr. Nurse, seconded by Mr. Chadha. All in favor? That carries. They are approved. We move on to declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Does any member have a declaration of pecuniary interest to declare on any matter being discussed today?
Chair, A18139, previous working relationship with the client.
Okay, thank you. Any others? Seeing none? Yeah.
Conflict as well with A18139, 1453 Queen Street West.
Okay.
Previous contract conversations with the client.
Okay, thank you. We move on to withdrawals and deferrals. We have a written request for a deferral by Glenn Schnarr and Associates by, I believe, Mr. Colin Chung.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. We received a staff report just late last Thursday, and staff raised some concerns with the variance application filed under application A19-007, also known as the Jane Temple lands at Mayfield Road and Clarkway Drive. We didn't have the opportunity to sit down with staff to discuss and resolve the issues. I think staff's concerns are warranted, and I think it deserves an opportunity for a meeting and discuss and resolve those matters. As a result of that, I think there may be potentially amendment to the application. So we're asking for a deferral to the March 26th committee meeting. That way, we have an opportunity to meet with staff. If there's application that needs to be amended, it will afford the time to do so.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions by committee members to the agent pertaining to the deferral? Is there anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none, staff, would you like to weigh in with the deferral request?
We'll be supportive of the deferral request to meet with the applicant and discuss the issues.
Okay, so the March 26th meeting?
Yes, that works.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Myers, I assume that works for circulations and so forth.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any questions? If not, seeking a motion to proceed.
Motion to defer this application to March 26th hearing.
By Mr. Chadha, seconded by Ms. Doppler. All in favor? That carries. That is deferred.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Do we have any other requests for deferral or withdrawal from the audience?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning.
And members of the committee. My name is Hannah Bamapour. I appear as counsel on behalf of the owners of 27 Church Street East, application A18-179.
Okay.
This application was before you on December the 4th, whereby we requested a deferral as we had recently been engaged on the matter. Very recently, we've engaged in discussions with staff with respect to, or in an effort to bring the property into compliance with the zoning bylaw. We are working at scheduling a meeting with planning, zoning, as well as heritage staff, which we've been recently advised should put some input on the proposed solution. And so we're requesting a deferral to the next Committee of Adjustment hearing date, I believe February 12th, 2019, in an effort to have those discussions. And if we are able to reach a mutual agreement, we hopefully won't need the variance and would withdraw at that time. That would be our
Thank you.
request.
Any questions by committee members to the agent? Is there anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none? Staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Staff is supportive of the deferral request to work with the applicant finding ways to bring the property into compliance.
My only concern is the actual next meeting. Would we have sufficient time, Ms. Myers, for circulations on that meeting?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's my understanding that the applicant is not proposing any amendments to that application if they do proceed.
Okay,
That's correct. No
perfect. So
changes.
for the next meeting then?
Yes.
Okay, committee members? Any questions? If not, seeking a motion to proceed. Motion to support the deferral by Mr. Nurse to the next Committee of Adjustment meeting. Seconded by Ms. Doffler. All in favor? That carries. That is deferred.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Again, seeking any other deferrals or withdrawal the requests?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members committee. Richard Domes from Gagnon Walker Domes Ltd. We are the agent for Fateh Developments Inc., who is the owner of 1453 Queen Street West.
Okay, just one moment, please. Go ahead, Mr. Dome.
Okay. Committee and the chair might recall that I was in front of you in early December with respect to this application, and the committee granted a deferral to allow my client to have continued discussions with city staff with respect to the concerns raised in the city's November 30th staff report. We have met with city representatives in this matter, and we continue to work through the issues and towards hopeful resolution. But unfortunately, we need more time to get there. So we are asking for an indefinite deferral because of the interest at the city with this application. The indefinite deferral is requested to avoid having to come back and request a further deferral again.
Mr. Nurse, any questions?
None here, Chair. I support the deferral.
Okay. Is there anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none, staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments on the deferral request?
Through you, Mr. Chair, planning staff would be supportive of the deferral, however, not in the indefinite nature. So we would be looking for a deferral of 2 hearings. Maybe the Secretary Treasurer could advise us what that date would be.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if we're looking at the second hearing date, that would be March 5th, 2019.
Okay. March 5th. So I leave it to Mr. Nurse and myself. My only concern is that we've already had a deferral, so if we don't meet those timelines, we'd have to go through this process again. But, Mr. Nurse?
I'm fine with March 5th, Chair.
March 5th?
And through you, Mr. Chair, there are 2 meetings in March for consideration if it's staff's, there's March 5th and March 26th.
Okay. Mr. Domes?
Like you highlighted, Mr. Chair, those dates don't sound unreasonable. However, I don't want to be in front of you again, and we're trying to work with city representatives to get a resolution of the matter. I prefer the comfort of knowing that when we've got this nailed down, so to speak, I can come in front of you as soon as possible.
Okay. I tend to agree with the indefinite just for that reason, but, Mr. Nurse, I leave it for you for entertaining either way.
Well, I don't know, I'm fine with the 26th as well.
26?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll meet halfway there. It would be March 26th?
Yep. Is that right?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is a hearing date scheduled for March 26th.
Okay. So if there are no other questions or concerns, seeking a motion to proceed.
Motion to
Motion
March
to
26th.
March 26th. All in favor? That carries. So that is deferred to the March 26th meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other requests for withdrawals or deferrals? Seeing none? For those unfamiliar with the Committee of Adjustment procedure and process, I'd like to give a brief explanation and scope before we proceed. Following some procedural matters that we have already undergone, the Secretary Treasurer will then call the applications by announcing the application number, the name of the applicant, and the address of the property subject to the application. The applicant or authorized agent representing the applicant will then come down to the podium, state their name and address for the record, and present the application. I request that you reserve any questions or comments pertaining to the staff report until after planning staff has had an opportunity to present. If there is anyone in attendance who wishes to speak to a particular application, you will be given the opportunity to do so when the application is presented. Any decision made here today may be appealed to the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, LPAT. Previously, the appeal process was dealt through the Ontario Municipal Board. However, the province introduced new legislation in the form of Bill 139, which came into force April 3rd, 2018. Appeals received in the City Clerk's office associated with minor variance and consent applications will be processed and forwarded to the LPAT, again, which was processed previously as an OMB application. This process may be commenced through the Secretary Treasurer by filing a completed appeal form and filing fee within the prescribed 20-day appeal period. Information pertaining to the appeal process may be obtained by contacting the Secretary Treasurer within the City Clerk's office. We now move on to new consent applications. Staff, could we get the other committee members called back in, if you don't mind?
Calling applications B19001 and B19002, 10254 Pure Ontario Property Inc. for properties at 10254 Pure Ontario Street and 415 Railside Drive.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of committee. My name is Michael Vanny. I'm a planner with the Weston Consulting Group. I'm here to speak to you today regarding applications B19001 and 002 at the property at 415 Railside Drive and 10254 here, Ontario Street. As both applications are somewhat similar to each other, just to keep things simple, I will speak one at a time. So starting with 001, the application is to sever to create a new lot. We are proposing to sever approximately 23.34 hectares at the southeast portion of the property from the retained portion, which will be approximately 7.03 hectares. The severed lot is subject to a current site plan application before the city. It is proposed to be developed for industrial uses and will feature a 1.2 million square foot warehouse distribution center for Canadian Tire. The retained lot is also subject to a separate site plan application, which is currently before staff and will be developed again for industrial related warehousing uses for a separate company. So part of this process is to not only sever the property to create the two lots, but also to create 3 easements over the severed lands. The 3 easements have been identified as required through the site plan review process, and I will list them for you now. The first one being a 6-meter wide private storm easement that will extend down the western and southern boundary of the severed parcel. The purpose for this easement is to convey storm flows from the western portion of the retained lands to Ironside Drive for the eventual redevelopment of that parcel, which was created through an application back in August of 2018, application B18-018. The second easement is a 7.5 meter wide private servicing easement, which will extend from the future Y Bank Drive cul-de-sac at the northeast corner of the property to the heritage property, which was created through application B18-019, again back in August of 2018. The easement is required to provide servicing to the heritage parcel once the heritage house is ultimately moved. Currently, the heritage house is located in the center of the severed property and has been approved by the Brampton Heritage Board to be moved to that location. Staff have also provided a substantial complete memo to the building department so that pre-permits can now be issued for the movement of that house. The third is a revision to a previous easement that was approved through application B18-019. This is to provide pedestrian and vehicular access to the heritage parcel, as well as to provide for municipal traffic signaling infrastructure to be located within the easement, which has been required as part of the site plan review process. Essentially, this application is identical to the one that was approved by committee on July 12, 2016. The only difference is that the severed and retained parcels are essentially flipped. The reason for this is to correct a technical error that was identified through the severance process and to resolve an issue with Section 50.6 of the Planning Act. Essentially, everything is the same. Like I said, the only real difference is that we are now adding easements and that the Railside Drive cul-de-sac has already been conveyed to the city and securities have been posted, as well as a development agreement for that cul-de-sac. So
Thank
we have
you.
reviewed the staff reports. We've had numerous discussions with staff, city legal, as well as our legal counsel, and we agree with the recommendations staff have put forward, as well as the conditions that they have recommended.
So just as a quick question, the easement for the heritage property, the vehicular access, that is actually for driveway access point from here, Ontario?
Yes. So there will only be one access off of here, Ontario, for both the Canadian Tire lands and the heritage parcel.
Any questions by committee members to the agent? Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience here to speak on this application or on these applications? Seeing none, staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Michael pointed out, the only change here is to basically switch the severed and retained lands as shown in the diagram and add the easements shown in purple. Other than that, the property line stays the same as the previously approved severance B16014. And in with that respect, staff's position that application B19001 is supportable subject to the following conditions being imposed. 1, if required by the city, the applicant will enter an agreement with the city to the satisfaction of the city solicitor to amend the development agreement dated July 13th, 2017, and registered on title to the lands on July 14th, 2018, so that it is appropriately reflects and takes into account this newly approved consent. If not required by the city will provide confirmation to that effect. 2, that the required easements be satisfactory to the city of Brampton. And 3, that the owner shall make arrangements satisfactory to the chief building official that all future services have separate connections to municipal water, sanitary, and storm sewer systems in accordance with the Ontario Building Code. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, have you had an opportunity to read those conditions?
Yes.
And they are agreeable?
Yes.
Have you had an opportunity also, there's a few draft conditions that the Secretary Treasurer has prepared? Those are also satisfactory? Have you had a chance to review those?
I have not seen the draft. Yes, these are supported.
Thank you. So if there are no further questions or concerns, seeking a motion to proceed.
Motion to approve with the condition.
Motion to approve with conditions by Mr. Chadha, seconded by Ms. Doppler. All in favor? That carries. They are approved, sir.
Thank you. So moving on to application B19-002. So I know there's a few new faces on committee, but back in August of 2018, we had done 5 severance applications to divvy up the lands for future industrial uses, also required as part of the 2 site plan process that are going forward. So as part of that process, we did 2 lot additions, one to add lands to the northwest parcel so that it was squared off properly, and then also to allow for additional developable area for the site plan application to the north. We also severed off a portion of land and added it to the Canadian Tire block for the eventual conveyance of the Wide Bank Drive cul-de-sac. We created the heritage parcel for the movement of the heritage house, as well as severed off the western and eastern portions of the northwest parcel for future development blocks. So in doing that, we have identified through the preparation of the reference plan and through our ongoing discussions and review process as part of the site plan that there is a small orphaned parcel that has basically been created once the Wide Bank Drive cul-de-sac is conveyed to the city. It is too small to develop for industrial uses or for any uses for that matter. So this application is being brought forward to basically add those lands to the future development block, which is shown in orange on the attached sketch, so that there would be appropriate development of that lot and so that there isn't an orphan parcel. So essentially, as part of that, we're proposing to add 0.0031 hectares from the Canadian Tire block to the future development block 1, which was created through application B18-020. Also, as part of this application, and which was approved through B18-020, was a municipal storm easement that would connect Railside Drive and the future Wide Bank Drive cul-de-sac for storm and servicing infrastructure. Given that there is a current orphan parcel there, that easement is not connected, so we are proposing to extend the easement over the lot addition so that it can appropriately connect between the 2 cul-de-sacs. So the purpose of this application is essentially to fulfill the recommendations and the approval of the previous committee approvals. So I've reviewed the staff report, and again, we have consulted rigorously with staff on this matter. We agree with the recommendations contained in the staff report and the proposed conditions.
Thank you. There's also several draft conditions that were proposed by the Secretary Treasurer as well on this one.
Yes, we agree with these conditions.
Okay. Seeing no one in the audience here to speak on these applications, staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Michael pointed out, we have been working with the applicant to finalize all of the reference plan in association with the application staff are currently reviewing. This application basically takes the red portion shown here and adds it to the orange portion. The rest of the colored portions have already been approved by committee. And in that regard, staff believe the application B19-002 is supportable, subject to the following conditions being imposed. 1, that consent certificates for applications B18-016 through B18-020 and B19-001 be issued prior to the issuance of the consent certificate for B19-002. And 2, that the owner shall make arrangements satisfactory to the chief building official that all future services have separate connection to the municipal water, sanitary, and storm sewer systems in accordance with the Ontario Building Code. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee members, any questions? Seeing none, seeking a motion to proceed.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve with the stated conditions by Mr. Nurse, seconded by Ms. Doppler. All in favor? That carries. That is approved, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Calling application A19-006, Victor and Claudia de Ortega. Property is located at 3 Labella Street.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Frank Bandiera. I'm the architect and agent for this application. With our application, we submitted a letter outlining the reasons for our proposal. If you'd like, I can repeat some of those points. Otherwise, I have read the report and have no issues with the conditions being applied.
Okay. Committee members, are there any questions to the agent pertaining to anything in the application? Seeing none at this time, is there anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none, staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff is of the opinion that this application is supportable, subject to following conditions being imposed. One, that the owner obtain a building permit for the accessible wheelchair lift and deck prior to the commencement of construction and within 60 days of the date of decision of the committee. Two, that if the accessible wheelchair lift is to be removed, the garage shall be restored by the owner to accommodate 1 parking space within the garage for a total of 2 parking spaces for the dwelling unit. 3, that the variance to permit 1 parking space for the dwelling unit is only applicable to the extent of accommodating a wheelchair lift in the garage. 4, that the applicant provide a letter of authorization and/or indication that the condominium corporation bylaw declaration does not prevent the requested variance. And 5, that failure to comply with and maintain the conditions of the committee will render the approval null and void.
Thank you. So, sir, you've already mentioned that you've had an opportunity to review those conditions and they are agreeable to you?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Any questions or concerns by committee members? I'm seeking a motion to proceed.
Motion to approve the application.
Motion to approve applications with conditions by Mr. Nurse, seconded by Ms. Stoffler. All in favor? That carries. That is approved, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Calling application A19-010, Amjad and Farida Amjad. Property is located at 7 Hillcrest Avenue.
Good morning, all. How are you guys?
Good morning.
I'm here for file A19-010. I am the representative for the client, applicant owner Amjad Javid, and based on the minor variance requested.
Just your name, sir, as well.
Alistair Ferrara.
Okay.
Based on the minor variance submitted, what we're looking to have, it's 6 inches for building height, as well as 11% lot coverage. And we read everything that's in the report that was submitted to us, and we're okay with it.
Okay. Committee members, any questions to the agent or the owner of the application? Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none, staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments and thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This application was evaluated against the 4 tests under Section 45 of the Planning Act, and the application was found to be supportable, subject to the following conditions, or condition, that the owner finalize site plan approvals under city file number SP 18-077.000 to the satisfaction of the Director of Development Services within 180 days of the date of the committee's final decision, or within an extended period of time as approved by the Director of Development Services.
Thank you. It's not stated here, but, and I don't think it's required as a condition, just so that the owners and agents, and a building permit will be required, obviously, to proceed as well.
Yes.
So you guys do understand that as well,
Yes,
correct?
yes.
Just wanted to highlight that. If there are no other questions or concerns, seeking a motion to proceed.
Motion to approve with the condition.
Motion to approve with the condition by Mr. Chadha, seconded by Ms. Stoffler. All in favor? That carries. That is approved, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Calling application A19-011, 2644083 Ontario Limited. The property is located at 18 Corporation Drive.
Is the agent or owner present for the application A19-011, 18 Corporation Drive?
I'm looking for access to the screen if I could.
Through staff.
There's going to be a couple of them. So. Order. Okay, there we go. I apologize. My name is Kevin Béchard. I'm with Weston Consulting. I'm appearing as agent on behalf of the applicant, Marcus Liu, in his application for minor variance respecting the property at 118 Corporation Drive. For the Mr. Chairman and the committee, I'd like to start with my presentation with a discussion of the staff report that has been provided for A19-001. I think that discussion will narrow perhaps the topic of consideration and then move forward with our client's specific request for the permission of allowing an expansion to the permitted area for the Stanford School, which staff have referred to as a commercial entity, and we have referred to as an employment use, as well as the request for permission to allow for a martial arts school on the property, which of course I'll get to in a little bit in my presentation. So referring to the staff report, initially the applicant had provided for 4 different variances or 3 different variances to the property or proposal. And the first variance is to permit a commercial and technical recreational school having a maximum gross floor area of approximately 1,740 square meters was his intent. Staff have recognized that request for a variance and modified their recommendation from the original request to limit the request to 1,489 square meters. Perhaps what I could do is pause, and on the screen I've put up a copy or a illustration of the site plan of the commercial school, commercial building. It is located on Corporation Drive at Torbram Road. It has multiple units for tenancy. If you could flip to the next schedule. I'm trying to illustrate here the area within 500 meters of the site. The site is adjacent to, is on Torbram Road. It's adjacent to Thomas Aquinas School and opposite the Bramalea residential neighborhood, as well as included in the employment area. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is the market area or the uses for this industrial mall and commercial uses is really split almost even between a residential area as well as looking at the budding school, high school, as well as servicing the employment area to the north and east. So it really has a varied market, and consequently, our client, if I can move to the next sketch, has a variety, and that's a little, I apologize, that's a little difficult to read. Maybe you can bring that up. Thank you very much. And there are a number of tenancies already located in the industrial mall and permitted through past variances, etc., where we have restaurant, technical training, printing establishment. Technical training is for fork truck school. Printing establishment is an employment use. Medical and professional offices in tenant vacancies. The last two areas are highlighted areas are the subject of our concern today in terms of permitting a martial arts school. It's identified as a commercial school and is also recognizing the existing technical school. You may recognize it as Stanford Technical School, recognizing the existing build-out at 1,490 square meters. It's the 1,490 square meters that staff have recognized in their recommendation for approval of that particular use. I think they are at 1,489, rounding up to 1,490. And certainly we agree with staff insofar as they have proposed a recommendation that supports recognition of the build-out of the technical school. So in that sense, we're all together. In terms of the staff recommendation, additional recommendations, we are not in alignment in terms of the designation of approximately 238 square meters for the martial arts commercial school, and I'll speak to that in a minute. As well, we no longer have an interest in proposing a fitness center. That's been identified as a proposed use, so that's recommendation 2. And we no longer have an interest in recommendation 3, and that would be permitting a banquet hall having a maximum square meterage of 140. So in discussions with staff and coming to this committee today, we've narrowed the items for consideration essentially to the technical school, which I've indicated agreement, and secondarily to the provision for a martial arts facility. If I can go to the next sketch. So this gives you an idea, if you mind just pushing up a little bit, thank you. So this is a floor area showing the whole of the industrial mall. The area outlined in orange, but blank, is the Stanford Technical School. The dashed one is the martial arts school. So you can see from this sketch that Stanford occupies the majority of the real estate, I guess, and unit tenancy in this particular industrial mall. I'm going to turn to our submission to staff and relating to this application. In essence, what we have asked for is that the committee consider the Stanford Technical School as an employment use. Staff have identified it as a commercial use on the property, and currently this property, the Stanford School, is occupying approximately 11 units on the. I'm sorry, 8 units on the of the industrial mall. It would be considered. It's considered an employment use in our eyes, in the sense that it provides a range of employment uses relating to instruction, regarding industrial automation, industrial electrician, accounting, payroll administration, etc. Staff have identified it as a commercial school because of the way that it operates. So students would come to this school and they would pay for this training and services. The difficulty here is that the zoning provisions really aren't mutually exclusive. When we say restaurant in one and banking in the other, we have an understanding that they're two distinct operations. In this case, Stanford is both. It's both a commercial school and it has an industrial or employment-related function. So our position before this committee and our request is for an interpretation that this particular use relates more to the industrial employment function than it does as a commercial school. In fact, its method of operation. I'm going to go back to two prior consent applications where this issue was discussed, and I think the committee in both cases landed on the side and or the position this is primarily an employment use in an industrial mall. If we go back to the staff report, it references a number of prior applications. And minor variance applications that have occurred. And the first one I'm going to take you to is A93-181, November 9, 1993. And in that case, the committee was asked to consider the provision for a technical school. The issue relating to the definition of an industrial mall is such that it requires 5 industrial users, and the building at that time only had 2 industrial users. The committee's decision at that time was to permit the technical school to go forward with 2 industrial users instead of 5. The second minor variance application that I want to direct the committee to is A16-9093, May 24, 2016. It again is to permit a commercial, technical, or recreational school having a maximum area of 1440 square meters. The committee at that time permitted the expansion of the existing technical school to a maximum of 1440 square meters. In both instances, the committee would have recognized that the industrial mall was limited in terms of its number of employment users. In our estimation, in our position, this facility at 18 Corporation Drive has relief from the industrial mall provision of the requirement for 5 industrial users. This permission was initially provided for in A93-181 and reaffirmed in A16-093 in May of 2016. So our first position before this committee is that the applicant is able to provide for this additional martial arts on the basis of having at least 2 industrial users. The industrial users, if I could go back to the previous sheet that was taken off with the highlighted points, there is a printing establishment there and a technical training or forklift operation there as well. So on the basis of those prior uses, our first position is that we believe the applicant is entitled to the additional use of a martial arts school on the basis of past approvals in 1993 and 2016. Our second position is that is outlined in our letter of December 19th, and that is that the technical school, the Stanford Technical School, is an employment use and not a commercial school in terms of its intent and use of the bylaw. We believe that it satisfies the purpose and intent of the official plan and zoning bylaw insofar as it promotes employment uses on the property. It is not a commercial school such as a driving school would be considered. So we would ask the committee as a further amendment to consider the commercial school at Stanford an employment related use. When we look at, finally, a third submission and supportive submission is that we have to identify, without the technical use, we have two identified employment or industrial uses on the property. There are also adjacent or additional vacant tenancies, and if need be, to establish the additional use on the property, we would be able to convert a vacant dwelling to an employment or industrial use. But at that point, I raise that as a point for future discussion if need be. But certainly we feel that on the basis of the past minor variances that have been provided on this site, which have recognized Stanford in terms of its employment use and capacity, and also the provision of two existing employment uses, that the application for the committee for the martial art school should be considered and should be approved, in addition to the recommendation that's provided for by the staff report on recommendation 1, and that's to increase or recognize the existing technical school in its current capacity, having a GFA or square footage of 1,490 square meters. I have Marcus Liu with me as well. He would like to address the committee if that's possible at this time.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Kevin, and thanks to all the members of the Committee of Adjustment. My name is Marcus Liu. I'm existing. Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe my voice is a bit low. My name is Marcus Liu, and I'm a current owner of this property. I would like to make a few points that we've been experienced so far since we've taken over this property last year, July 11th. So this building is 28,000 square foot. It's a typical commercial building, but it's on a 3-acre corner lot, industrial lot, and that was built back in 1993. According to the previous owner, the Service Canada was occupying this entire building since day one of the build, except the west corner would be used as a retail or restaurant for the last 20 years. And to our knowledge, the Service Canada moved out early in 2013. So after that, the property has been vacant for almost around 7 years, and it became stressful for the owner, especially our new owner, were still keeping vacant and paying a high, heavy tax for the property. When we took over the property, it was in bad shape. So it has been, we noticed there has been a favorite place in the back of the building for drug traders and vandalism, and garbage dumpers, and a free parking lot. We took over this property with the hope and faith the city would not let this situation going further to be basically misused like this, and we will work with us. We trust that the city will work with us to find a solution to bring it back to its health performance. During the past 8 months of our listing for lease at this property, it has been obvious that the property remain long-term vacancy mainly is because of the limit of the zoning, existing zoning for industrial zone. And the property itself has been built from initial construction as a low ceiling and no back track access or garage doors. So it is very difficult for any owners to lease this property purely for industrial purpose. On the other hand, it is obviously not economical or structurally feasible to change the whole roof structure to raise the ceiling and to convert this property back to industrial use facility. Beside that, considering this location factor, which we see it is the smallest property in the whole block of industrial zone, and less than 100 meters across the corporation, it is a high school with a couple thousand students. We believe it is a better contribution to the school or nearby residential community to allow a few more commercial users than purely for manufacturing, warehouse, or transportation use. And this will look better for both environmental perspective and safety perspective and convenience perspective for the location that we are in. Based on the fact the commercial type of building was indeed being allowed to build on this industrial land for historical reason, we really appreciate that Committee of Adjustment may kindly consider a certain relief to allow us more commercial uses if need, and help this property back to its life. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions by committee members to the agent or the owner?
Just through you, Mr. Chair, quick question. That at the corner, the retail restaurant, that's no longer there as well now, right?
I'm sorry, the restaurant?
The corner restaurant was in and out, changing hands quite a few times. Right now, we got in a new pizza, Papa John Pizza. It's under renovation. That's the only restaurant coming back. But allow me to address that. Based on our investigation, the single restaurant in the entire building seems to have been not successful due to the limited traffic drop in. So in the future, hopefully, if allowed for a few more, one or two more restaurant related will be helpful, but not at the topic of today. Thank you.
So, I mean, a lot of numbers that were thrown, and I'm going to kind of reserve most of my comments till staff has had enough. But just for clarity, from what is now currently allowable, staff's recommendation is a small increase from 1440 to 1489. Your request is to increase that to 1740, decreasing what your original request was.
Yeah, so they're actually enveloping each other is what's happened in the nature. We were brought on after the filing of the application. So there are two things happening. The staff recommendation recognizes that Stanford was built out to the 1490. So it's just truing up on that basis. Okay. The balance is relating to the request for a martial arts school.
Essentially the adjacent unit.
The adjacent unit, and I had a sketch there if we could.
Yeah, no, we've gone by, and it's just, I just wanted to get that clear with all the numbers that were thrown out, is that we're speaking in terms of approximately 300 square meters. Yeah, yeah. The use itself, though, and again, I'll wait till staff, is it an allowable use currently? So I'll ask that, and once you do your presentation. And that's it for now.
In our position, we would look at it as a commercial school for the karate and the employment for Stanford.
through you, Mr. Chair, and I'm certain that the planner will speak more to his evaluation of the uses. From a zoning perspective and a compliance perspective, the Stanford School is a technical school. It is a post-secondary or a training facility that possibly does teach a variety of industrial trade-related activities, but it has no association, and the people who are being trained and paying for the education that they receive there are not working on this site. So they are training folks to go and be employed in other areas on other properties. So while it cannot be recognized as the zoning bylaw doesn't speak to employment uses, it speaks to industrial uses. And in this case, the types of industrial uses that are permitted on this property are actually very significantly limited. So you get things like warehousing and storage of goods, which clearly the Stanford School is not, apparel and finished textile and fabric product manufacturing, which clearly the Stanford School is not. The printing bookbinding that is currently there is the only permitted industrial use that's recognized. The truck training facility that was also identified is actually just an administrative office. It's in one of the very small units, so there's no actual industrial use associated with that. So it would be considered a permitted office use, because in this zone, in addition to the listed permitted industrial uses, it does have a blanket permission for business offices, which, as you note on here, could include medical and professional offices, whereas most industrial malls would not include that additional permission as an as-of-right use. So this entire site could be occupied with office uses, which would not otherwise be considered industrial for the purpose of the zoning bylaw, nor employment uses for the purpose of the official plan. But it is an as-of-right permission on this land.
Essentially, it was from what I understand, quasi a built-to-suit for a Service Ontario or Service Canada or whatever it was. Therefore, it was being used as office for that time frame.
That's correct, which is why back in the 90s they required the additional variance to allow a small restaurant to go in. At the time it was a donut store that went in there. It also specifically allowed for other uses that would be permitted in an industrial mall to establish here, but with a very strict cap of, I think it's 299 square meters. So in a very small way, they were considering allowing additional commercial uses that would otherwise be permitted in an industrial mall to occupy this building with only 2 industrial users. At this point in time, there's only 1 true industrial user based on the non-obnoxious industrial uses that would be permitted in this zone. But the other units can certainly be used for office purposes. And then, of course, the Stanford School was established by virtue of the variance that was approved with that cap on floor area. So what's before you today, as I understand it, with the modification to the application, is an additional commercial school for the Taekwondo studio and a small expansion to the Stanford to recognize existing as-built conditions.
Okay. I'll wait for the staff report as well. Just before we proceed, is there anyone in the audience here to speak on this application as well? Seeing none, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the applicants have revised the plans and only 1 variance is being requested now, and that variance is to permit the use size adjustment on commercial school for multiple users from the existing 1440 to 1740 square meters. While the applicants have appeared to make revisions to the original plans, it is still the opinion of the staff that the 4 tests under the Planning Act are not met. With regard to the first test, whether the proposed variance conforms to the intent of the official plan, the property is designated prestige industrial in the secondary plan, and it permits a range of uses, including warehousing, etc. And the official plan also permits service commercial uses, such as restaurants, banks, and offices proposed in industrial areas to locate in industrial malls or in conjunction with existing commercial developments. The requested variance proposes service commercial uses, the commercial school for martial arts, without meeting the requirement to be located in an industrial mall. Further, this proposed variance will introduce non-employment uses on the lands that are designated industrial. Such Such a proposal shall be considered through an official plan amendment or a zoning bylaw amendment. And a pre-consultation application was submitted by the applicant, and the staff is currently reviewing that to determine which application process would be appropriate. The existing technical school, though, serves as an associated educational purpose through technical skills training, and in turn, it supports the general industrial function of the property. Hence, the technical school conforms to the general intent. With regards to the second test, the variance I'll just go back to the previous variance application that was referred to in this application. That's the application A16093 that permitted the use of a commercial technical recreational school up to a maximum of 1440 square meters on the basis that the existing technical school was found to have an associated and supportive function to the industrial uses in providing technical skills training in various disciplines ranging from electrician to plumbing, etc. So in this case, though, the sketch shows a slight increase from 1440 to 1489. That's for the technical school. Considering it's a modest increase in size, that can be supported. However, for the martial arts school, the industrial mall requirement is still not met, and then in this case, the intent of the zoning bylaw is clear that they need to have a minimum of 5 industrial users to have that use permitted. Hence, the intent of the zoning bylaw would not be maintained by the proposed martial arts school. Only the increase in technical school can be maintained. Further, the properties along the north side of the Corporation Drive are predominantly industrial, and there is a school surrounded by the industrial uses. So the addition of the commercial use, that is a service-oriented use, will change the planned industrial function of the building, and it would not be considered as an appropriate development of land. And finally, the variance cannot be considered minor in nature given the anticipated detrimental impacts in terms of the change industrial function of the property. Hence, staff would not be in support with the second variance, the one to introduce a new use for martial arts, but would only support the increase in the technical school. And we would also introduce another condition that would only limit the use to a technical school. The previous variance permitted commercial technical recreational school. However, the basis of that variance was to permit the technical school only. So we would like to limit it to only technical school. Thank you.
So I did hear in your statement, and I'll ask the actual applicant, so as a pre-consultation has been commenced for a rezoning in its entirety as well?
That's correct. So pre-consultation application was submitted, and generally it's just a pre-consultation application, and it's determined at a later stage what other applications would be required, which is currently under review.
Any questions by committee members to staff?
I would reserve my comments after.
Okay. So I ask then the agent or applicant, is there an intent to proceed with a full rezoning, or was that just an inquiry? I'm just curious to where the mindset is.
There's a serious intent to proceed with commercial applications on the property. The challenge for our client is that, and in preliminary discussions, we're advised that may require an MCR in terms of the local regional official plan, which is really quite an involved process. Our position and where we differ from staff is the interpretation of Stanford, whether it's an employment use that can be reasonably associated with the industrial nature and industrial use and the nature of the, of course, employment area. And we think it is. we think that it meets the intent of the official plan and zoning to recognize that school in terms of its industrial capacity, industrial training capacity. It's reasonable and appropriate. So that's the absolute point of departure. If the committee were to grant this interpretation, then it would forestall the requirement for more complex and detailed applications, which don't serve my client any better in terms of outcome or in terms of timing and cost, given his situation is rather difficult in terms of occupying. So we'll get to the same place in the end, potentially, but with a lot more effort and a lot more time. And I think we're very close here in terms of looking at an employment use that supports an industrial area and contemplating it as industrial designation or industrial component on this property. And that's simply, when you take that departure, then it all lays out very differently between moving in a very streamlined way or moving into a fairly complex application for a very similar result. And in fact, the use is already there.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that, and again, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, and I'll wait for, again, committee members, but is that I think the principle of relooking at this property in its entirety is an important thing. I think staff is doing a good job at looking at that. However, at the same time, I think that this is a unique property, and it was built from its onset with difficulties. So I think it's a bit onerous for the owner to be absorbing these costs and having vacancies while we go through this discussion.
And paying taxes.
Yes.
He'll
So
tell you that.
is that where I'm going with this is that I'm just wondering is that if this variance is granted, will that still be something that you will be pursuing? And then I also ask that because that may be something that we can include as a condition.
Yes.
So that's where I'm asking that.
So the nature of that is, and you heard my client talk about restaurant uses, the site is limited by its variance to one restaurant use in the property. He would like to take that same area and divide it into two. You know, so the initial development contemplated a sit-down restaurant, for example, tables and chairs, etc. So now he has one tenant there, Papa Joe's, which demands less floor space. So there would be some reshaping, and we recognize that we would have to go through a rezoning, and we would to get that particular commercial use allowed on the property. If these lands were considered employment, and we then that would allow us to move forward with perhaps a commercial facility on the martial arts, a commercial school on the martial arts. We've dropped the recreation facility, we've dropped the banquet, and it will allow us to go to a further application to fine-tune the uses that are commercial, particularly the restaurant, as need be.
The employment aspect, though, even though I may agree with you fundamentally, I don't even know if it's within the scope of this committee to be looking at I respect it, and I bring it into my thought process, but if it's not an employment use, that's where I guess we're being pulled in both directions. It's something that I often consider, and I think the committee always considers the economic impacts.
Right.
I still, again, from my perspective, I can agree with the actual increase in square footage, in particular because we've been dealing with this since this committee was formed and even beyond, and it's been sitting vacant for, I think, that entire time.
Right.
So anyway, I'll continue. And
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a comment, more of as we have seen this very same property a few times within this committee time. I know staff is trying to put together good things and working, but if I recall, even before when I was on the committee, this property has been struggling ever since the Service Canada has left. I remember one time for the advance poll, I was there to vote myself, and I went inside. I think there was a temporary lease between Election Canada and the property back in 2015 or 2014. I do not recall exactly. And I noticed at that time it's been in rundown shape, and I'm glad that the new owner is doing the efforts to put together some things. as I do agree with you, Chair, on this is one of that unique property in the industrial mall, which is not too far from lots of houses, and there's a high school right across. So I at the same time, I do understand where the staff is coming from, but I do feel for the owner as well, that they are paying taxes and carrying this property for quite some time now. And I'll be inclining to support in any shape or form that, you know, these businesses can do better over there. And even whether that's on a temporary base or a permanent base. So that's just my comment. And further, for the martial art or the karate school, I was just looking for the address. If we go back on Williams Parkway, east of Airport Road, before Humber West, I have seen two plazas. The address is 2021 Williams Parkway and 2131 Williams Parkway. I noticed we do have karate schools over there as well. And I think the same can go here if those are, unless there's something else which I'm not aware.
If I may, the other two properties you're referring to do meet the qualifications to be considered an industrial mall. They do have 5 separate industrial users, which is what the bylaw would require to occupy that building in order for staff to consider it to be an industrial mall. In this case, because the permissions permit it to be used for an industrial mall without a doubt, and if they had 5 separate industrial users, the commercial school would also be permitted as of right. However, this also was constructed as an office building to suit the needs of Service Ontario. Business offices are permitted as of right. The entire building could be used as office. That would not make it an industrial mall for the purpose of applying the zoning permissions for a commercial school or other commercial use that would otherwise be permitted in an industrial mall. So it's kind of a catch-22. You're either an industrial mall and you get commercial school, or it's an office building where you don't get commercial school. So it's a tricky zone to apply, and as committee has noted, it has been vacant for a long time. In particular, not only because of the complexity of the zone and the previous established use, but the types of industrial uses are very restrictive as well to light manufacturing of, you know, drugs, electrical components, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics. So they're very specific conditions prescribed in this zone that would not otherwise apply to just a regular industrial and manufacturing like the properties up on Lanes Parkway.
And again, so would this also be, and I heard the applicant or the agent say, an MCR would also be in play if they were looking? It would be something above and beyond that they would have to then keep in mind if they're going to be proceeding?
So that's correct. Staff is currently reviewing that, whether an MCR would be required or not, and they will confirm that soon. But yes, since this property is designated industrial and employment lands, any change from removing lands from the industrial designation would require an MCR, and if the area of the removal of the designation is more than 1,000 square meters, and in this case it is. Another factor is that an MCR currently is under the authority of the region of Peel, so staff is currently in discussions with them to confirm this.
Yeah, and I think fundamentally, like I said, is I agree with that whole process. I just think that this building is an anomaly from day one. It doesn't really meet a true industrial use, ceiling heights, all those aspects that, you know, so we're putting parameters on a building that, or restrictions that are difficult for the actual owner to actually comply with. So, again, I would be inclined to support the request for the increased square footage, and I would just ask, and then maybe ask staff if there's any other conditions. I think the conditions that you are recommending are quite simple, and it would just be, from what I see, an increase in number, unless something else is. Mr. Steiger?
Yeah, so we would likely wish for you to differentiate between the Stanford being defined solely as technical school, and then if you're choosing to add a certain amount of other commercialize it, the martial arts would, I guess, be commercial school, have that defined separately. Otherwise, you would be allowing a whole range of schools within that broad thing, and that certainly was not the intent of the previous staff's support basis for support previously. So there would have to be some delineation there.
So if it
You'd
is
have to add a second condition.
the will of committee, then that's the distinction that you'd be looking for.
Yeah.
Sir?
Mr. Chairman, if I could say, one of the aspects of this issue is an industrial mall requires 5 industrial users. We've had, our client has had previous relief in this capacity to 2 industrial users. I think that would go a long way to solving the need for further MCRs, et cetera, is simply to require or retain that capacity, only requiring 2 industrial users, and then we can sort the rest out through the commercial schools and perhaps the karate application there. So if I could suggest continuing that, maybe providing some relief from the bylaw quandary that we're in, and recognizing that it was already considered and approved on 2 previous applications before the committee.
Ms. Corazola, I saw you guys talking. Is it the
Sorry.
fact that it's already there, or is that?
The variance that was approved, yes, back in 1993, still it continues to this day, subject to the conditions imposed in that decision. There's no variance before you today to increase the floor area associated with that previous approval that there be 2 industrial users maintained on this site. Personally, and I'm just offering my personal opinion, not on behalf of planning, but it would make it more flexible for the applicant to tenant this building if you didn't prescribe any required industrial users, because then they could exercise their rights to tenant the building with complete business offices or the industrial uses, whatever they were able to obtain in terms of an agreement with the leasee. In allowing the commercial school in the absence of an industrial tenant is what you're being asked of today, and that's what the previous approval was for the technical school that's currently established. There was no requirement that that technical school be maintained in association with any of the permitted industrial uses. It was simply a permission to allow a technical school of a certain size in the absence of any other conditions with associated uses in the remainder of the plaza. So to my colleague's point about if you're thinking of allowing the recreational school as well, I do have some recommended conditions that you might want to consider in that regard. Certainly the condition that has been recommended by planning staff that the previous variance associated with the technical school, allowing it to have a square footage of 1440 square meters, should be declared null and void. Otherwise, that will allow now 2 commercial schools, roughly over 1450 square
Right.
meters. I would suggest that the variance to permit, that your approval would be conditional on permitting 1 technical school having a gross floor area of 1489 square meters. That you would also be looking to approve 1 recreational school having a gross floor area of 238 square meters. And then I would certainly recommend that the associated building permit conditions be placed in there, because the recreational school is already, sort of establishing itself in that unit. So I know that there have been some enforcement activities. I would ask that a building permit be obtained within 60 days of the date of the committee's decision, and that in addition, permit for any associated signage shall be obtained within 60 days of the committee's decision, and that all signage shall comply with the city's sign bylaw.
And the 238, I assume, corresponds with the actual unit size that they are seeking?
That is the approximate gross floor area. I'm hoping they round it up, but it would be a maximum of 238.
Okay. Any questions by committee members? Sir?
Sure. My client could accept those, would support that recommendation as well. Thank you.
Any questions by committee members? Okay. Any other comments by staff? Mr. Steiger?
I mean, I just would make the comment that, so it's not always on the onus on us to rectify situations related to zoning on properties, and it often seems the case coming to the committee that, oh, there's hardship within the bylaws, but, I mean, in this case, this has been well known, but we've never received an application, historically on this to rezone it or do an OPA. In fact, we had as noted in our report, we had a pre-consultation in 2015 to deal with this, and they could have slotted in with the existing MCR process at that time to deal with these matters. So, so some of these obligations are on landowners to, sort their own properties out as part of their business, and not always come.
And to be fair, I agree with you 100%. I mean, these are different property owners from what I understand.
Yes.
So so I think you're right. I'm hoping that these owners, and we can only be hopeful that will continue to actually, it's just that where I'm struggling is that this is such a unique parcel in terms of the industrial use, is where I think staff did a good job of actually imposing and looking at planning principles as they often do. It's just that this was from day one put in a precarious scenario from the way it was built, and imposing planning conditions on a building that is unique makes it very difficult, I guess, for the end user, right? So I understand where you're coming from, Mr. Steiger, and agree with the basics of that. Sure. And we hope that the owners are respectful of all the time that's been put in.
So I would suggest then also that they make that a condition include that they pursue a rezoning OPA application to try to deal with this issue as a condition of the variance. And then in relation to the recreation school, the commercial school, the consideration that be temporary as some means of, persuading, putting some onus on the applicant to actually fix this one.
And I can't speak for all committee. I agree with you fundamentally. Where I'm hesitant in putting that is the MCR component as well, and the fact that now there's a time frame that they have to then be put into from what I understand, be put into the queue for the MCR that will then, a 5-year window if I'm not mistaken. So again, without putting in, not overcomplicating this, is that I would support that if that's what committee would support, sir?
I'd raise the issue that, of course, Stanford's been there quite some time, and to put a timestamp on this may be very difficult because it'll create uncertainty in terms of the future capacity to operate or continue operating as they are in the building. Certainly our client will has undertaken to go forward with the commercial program. The reason we're at the committee is quite frankly at my client's absolute insistence. He's not going to make it that long on this property if we go through that length of process. So we're happy to make the application continue on, but I think in this case he needs to have the means to do that.
Mr. Steiger?
Mr. Chair, the recommendation with regard to time limit would only be associated with the martial arts school, not with the Stanford school. So we're definitely differentiating between the two. So.
Okay. Yes. Comments? Ms. Myers, do you want to get some clarity?
Before we proceed, for the benefit of any decision that is made here today, the applicant had amended his application after the public notices were circulated. So really, we should be officially amending this application here in a public forum for committee's consideration, because the staff recommendation report is also based on the 3 variances that were previously applied for. The amendment from the applicant was received after circulation of the public notice, as well as authoring the staff recommendation report. So for committee's consideration, are we amending the application just for the 1 variance for the technical school, or are we proceeding with the 3 variances?
So the original variance being sought the commercial, technical, and recreation.
As well as the fitness center and the banquet hall.
Right.
So the public notices were circulated based on that request by the applicant in their original submission.
Right.
The public notices, the application was since amended by a letter dated January 15th.
Right.
However, public notices had already been circulated. If the applicant is amending his application for committee's consideration, that's what I need to know for the purpose of structuring the decision made here today.
Sir?
Sir, yes, we're amending the application going forward, and we would like to proceed on the basis that has been outlined by staff just a few moments ago in terms of the 2 points. One is recognizing the Stanford School at 1480 square meters, and the second would be to provide for the commercial recreation or recreation school. I'm getting my terms mixed. I'm at 238 square meters, which would accommodate the karate school or the martial arts school. So we're prepared to amend our application to reflect the discussion that's occurred today.
All right, well, I guess if there are no further questions or comments, I'll seek a motion to proceed. For clarity, I guess the motion would be if you want to include any other conditions or proceed with, I guess, some of the conditions that have been put forward by Ms. Corazzola and staff as well.
Just through you, Mr. Chair, I would like to put forward a motion with Ms. Corazzola's recommendations, but I'd like to have one full wording one time so it's clear for everyone.
I can wing it.
Please.
Certainly, the proposed conditions for your consideration are that the variance be approved to permit one technical school, and you can even specify which technical school you'd like in practice, but to permit one technical school having a maximum gross floor area of 1489 square meters, and two, that one recreational school having a gross floor area of 238 square meters shall be permitted, that the previous variance under file 16-093, that's for the former technical school, setting the floor area at 1440, shall be declared null and void. Number 4, that a building permit shall be obtained within 60 days of the date of the committee's decision. And number 3, that a sign permit shall be obtained and that all signage on the building shall comply with the city's sign bylaw. There was some discussion, and for consideration, the 2 conditions that Mr. Steiger was recommending that you may consider adding is to require that an application to rezone the property be received within a reasonable period of time. I would recommend 180 days. And further, that the approval associated with the one recreational school, the Taekwondo school, be limited to a 5-year approval, if that's at your pleasure.
Mr. Tree Chair, Mr. Steiger, those last 2 conditions, are you on board with them? The last 2 conditions that Ms. Corazzola mentioned, are you on board with them?
In terms of on board, I mean, if the committee chooses to support this application, then we recommend to the committee that you consider those. I mean, as an obligation, as a means of making the site active, that someone actually actively acts upon coming forward and fixing the zoning on this site, and not constantly coming in front of the committee and asking for, you know, I want this use and I want that use, and as opposed to just deal with the property holistically. And yeah, it may take a bit of time, but staff, I believe, is willing to work through this situation with them. In the report, we've actually, stated that we recognize the circumstances of this property, but so simply said, it's mainly as a tool or a mechanism to make sure that the they move forward with the other aspect of this. So, and they've raised it here, and so they should move forward on it. So.
Okay.
And if there's, some delay, they can always come back to the committee and ask for a further extension on the temporary use. So.
Any comments by the agent and owner?
Yes, certainly the first 4 or 5 points that were discussed, we accept those as conditions without modification. the requirement to make an application for rezoning of the property within 180 days, I mean, subject to, the technical process. We certainly agree with that as well and would go forward. The concern remains about putting a timestamp on an approval in that the martial arts school are two young men who've invested probably their parents' savings in bringing this forward, and it seems that we have a tentative issue that this may or may not be a consideration for approval at a future date, depending on the rezoning. So I would prefer not to put a time on that because I think it causes some challenge potentially with the investment that's already made.
And but for clarity, the applicant would have no problem with the rezoning application submittal.
Yeah, he's quite content to go forward in that process and recognizes that it could be a 2-year plus process. Okay.
We gotta make a decision, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly believe, sorry, Ms. Doppler?
Chair, I appreciate that both parties are working together. I think that's the best case scenario. So I think we're on the road. I think we have a good set of recommendations in front of us. My only suggestion would be for the martial arts, instead of limiting to 5 years, to limit it to 10 years. That then is not onerous on anybody's part.
Okay.
I think it speaks to the fact that both parties want to continue to work together. You're gonna go through rezoning. If you have to go through another process that allows you the time, and certainly the tenant, we recognize that there is always an investment, and 5 years is a short time to build on that investment. So I think in the interest of moving forward, but having a bit of a leverage that we don't accept this infinitum should something happen through rezoning, I think that limit would serve your purposes and the city's purposes, so that would be my recommendation.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I do agree with Member Duffler. 5 years is hard to secure a good lease as well, and 10 years something, and I commend how staff is really helping in this. But I would like to put either 10 years or no time stamp on the use.
The floor is open for the motion.
If the agents and they already cleared that they are going to coming within 180 days for an application for rezoning, so I think that's fair enough for us to move on. So I am okay without putting a time frame for 5 years or 10 years, and willing to put together my motion if committee is on board.
Okay, we'll put the motion forward.
Through the chair to Member Chaka, so the application for zoning.
Yes.
Include that as a condition?
Yes. 180 days.
Okay.
So that's my motion.
So for clarity, just so that we can reword it, it was as stated by Ms. Corazzola.
Yes.
With the addition of the, which would, I can't recall the number, be number 6?
I have 6 conditions.
With the addition.
That's excluding, if Mr. Chada is making a motion to exclude the recreational school be limited to a time frame.
Correct. So from what I understand, and you can correct me, is that we would include the condition of 180 days and exclusive of any time frame.
Yes.
Okay.
That's my motion.
And through you, Mr. Chair, just to confirm with the Secretary Treasurer that also includes the condition that failure to comply? Or is that an additional condition?
No.
Standard conditions.
Yeah, we have it there.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I have now a total of 7 conditions,
Yeah.
including the failure to comply.
Failure to comply with maintain the conditions. So that's my motion, Chair.
Okay. Seeking a seconder? Seconded by Mr. Nurse. All in favor? That carries. That is approved, sir.
Through you, Chair,
Thank you.
we need good businesses here. Welcome in Brampton.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Calling application A19-015, Januario and Maria Arajo. The property is located at 34 Duncan Bull Drive.
Morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Patricia Grassam, and I'm here representing my parents, Jawario and Maria Russo. They're also here, sitting down. We're looking for a variance for a gazebo that my father built in his side yard. So the issue here was his misinterpretation of the bylaws where it requires 2 feet from the property, if it's in the backyard, it requires 2 feet from the property line, and that's what, that's not me.
Yeah, it's construction.
That's what's required if the structure was in the backyard. His misinterpretation was that he built the gazebo in the side yard, and he assumed that was considered his backyard because there is a fence and a carport that separates the two. So there's only 2 feet from the property line where the bylaw requires it to be 4 feet.
Thank you. Yeah, we often see that with side lot. Ms. Corazzola can attest to side lots and backyards.
We've also received letters of support from other neighbors in the area.
Apologize, if just continue.
Sorry, we've received letters of support from neighbors in the area. I sent those to Jean yesterday. I'm not
We've
sure.
received those, and,
Okay,
and
perfect.
once we proceed, I'll mention those for the record as well.
Okay.
Any other information? We've visited the site. So the only variance being sought is for the gazebo at this time. The square footage conforms for the gazebo and the shed, Ms. Corazzola?
That's correct.
Perfect. Any questions by committee members to the agent? Is there anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Sir? Just step forward.
I live in the adjacent lot next door, 197.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I need
Just your name for the record,
David
sir?
Marlborough.
Okay,
Sorry?
so we've received the letter
You
from
got the
you?
letter
Yep.
this morning, yeah?
Yep.
Okay, I look out my kitchen window and this gazebo is right there. It stands over 9 feet tall, which is an eyesore. I'm standing, it's supposed to be 4 feet from the fence. This thing, I could reach over the fence and touch it. It's that close.
Okay.
Like, bylaws are bylaws. They write them for a reason. And this wasn't followed.
Understood.
You know, it'll take away from the value of my house, being this close to the fence, which is a problem for me.
We have your letter.
Yeah.
We'll include that in for the record.
Okay.
If there's any additional information. So just basically stating your case right now? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have received a letter from, I guess, the owners, Mr. David and Jennifer Marlborough to Adele Court. That would be submitted in opposition. We've received several letters as well in support of the application. They're numerous, so committee members, we have them in front of us. They are
It
resident.
doesn't affect them at all.
Okay, they are residents of Brampton.
No, I understand
Yeah.
that. So am I.
Yep.
I'm a taxpayer in Brampton. I pay my taxes. I pay for these bylaw people to come out here and do this. I pay for all the bylaws to be written and to be enforced.
And we respect that, sir, and
Okay.
that's the whole process of this
But
committee, to
these
review the actual
Yeah.
variances
Yeah.
and determine if they fit the parameters of this committee.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay. So both the opposition and then letters of support will be included in for the record as well. Any comments, any questions? Ms. Stoffler?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a question to the city. Is the height of the gazebo within keeping of the bylaw as well as the fence?
Yes, it is.
Adjacent to it?
Yeah, the bylaw permits an accessory structure having a building height of 3 meters, which is 9 feet 9 inches. That is measured to the midpoint between the eaves and the peak in accordance with the definition for building height and contained in our zoning bylaw.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Is there anyone else here to speak on this application?
Morning.
Hi.
How are you? My name's Janine Hunt. I live at 35 Duncanville Drive, right straight across from 34 Duncanville Drive. I did send in a letter opposing this gazebo to be there on the sideway, which the bylaw specifically states.
Through you, Mr. Chair. If I can just get the last name.
Hunt.
Hunt. Thank you. And the address was?
35 Duncanville Drive.
And one other thing, if I can confirm, I've not received a letter from anybody at that address.
Okay, I have copies of the letter here. Would you like them now?
If you have the
Yes.
letter. Yes.
Just one second. There's 2 of them there. They said that they were delivered. I sent it by registered mail, so, okay.
You can proceed while we actually are getting that.
Okay. Where the bylaw specifically states that there's nothing to be built on the sideway or the front way of your home. So all we're basically asking is for the gazebo to be moved to the back of the yard where it's not a kind of a safety hazard for the neighbor next door, because if anything falls off of it, slides on, they have children, it could harm the children. And the same as if they have anybody over, the neighbors that live adjacent to the property, if they have any friends over, same thing can happen, and we don't want any of that. So all basically we're asking is not for it to be torn down, just to be moved to the back of the yard. Because there's not enough, if you look straight at it, there's not enough width around the whole thing, because it's too close to the side yard and causes a potential hazard if something was to fall off of it.
That's fine. Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Seeing none. So those letters will be included in the record as well. Staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Staff has evaluated the proposed variance based on the 4 tests as prescribed under the Planning Act. And staff is recommending that the application be approved, subject to the following conditions. 1, that the extent of the variance be limited to that shown on the sketch attached to the public notice. 2, that within 60 days of the final date of the committee's decision, the owner shall obtain approval from the Public Works and Engineering Department that side yard drainage conforms to previous approved drainage for the property, is unobstructed by structures, is contained within the property and does not impact the adjacent property. 3, that the owner obtain a building permit for the gazebo within 60 days of the final date of the committee's decision. And finally, Mr. Chair, that failure to comply with and maintain the conditions of the committee will render the application null and void. Thank you.
One question, Mr. Grady. So that letter from the engineering department is to be sought from the city?
Mr. Chair, that is correct. That was a requirement that was identified by our development engineering section here in the city.
To verify that drainage and so forth is contained within the property?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any questions by committee members to staff? Ms. Doffer?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if we could just ask for clarification on the zoning bylaw again, because we've had some conversation that seems to contradict what we have written before us. In other words, that the gazebo or a structure, an accessory structure is allowed in the side yard. It's a matter of the dimension.
An accessory structure is not permitted in the required side yard. In this case, the required side yard is a 4-foot setback to the side lot line. The bylaw does permit accessory structures in the side yard, provided that, number 1, they're at least close, I wish I could paraphrase it, that they are 50% closer to the rear yard than the front yard. There's a dimension, so they can't be closer to the front yard than 50% of the length of the wall of the dwelling. So in this case, the accessory structure is beyond that 50% mark down the side wall. What the accessory structure is, though, is in a required side yard in as much as it's only 2 feet from the side lot line, whereas the bylaw requires that it be 4 feet from the side lot line to meet the required side yard setback in this zone.
questions, Ms. Stoffler?
No.
Any other questions by committee members? If there are no further comments, seeking a motion to proceed.
Motion to approve staff's recommendations.
As written by Mr. Chada. Do we have a second? Seconded by Ms. Stoffler. All in favor? That carries. That is approved.
Thank you.
And through you, Mr. Chair, I'm just verifying Member Nurse has dissented. Thank you.
So just to remind people in the audience, there is an appeal process that is available for both the residents in the area as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Calling application A19016, Fremont M1 Condos Inc. Property is located at 180 Veterans Drive.
I apologize for my voice. It's that time of year, I guess. It sounds worse than
Take your
what
time.
it actually is. So my name is Emma Barron. I'm the assistant manager of land development at Fremont Homes. I am the agent for this application. So I'm here today. Really, it's a technical matter with a previous application for a minor variance for our required parking. So the previous application allowed us to reduce our required parking to 89 spots with the condition that the required parking number remain at 104. And through a design review and I guess due to some marketing changes, we've actually decided to split a 2-bedroom into a 1-bedroom. And that's resulted in a higher required parking count than the 104. So we're here really to, I guess, address the fact that we're no longer meeting the condition that was imposed on our previous application. And that application was A18-090. So really, as outlined in the staff report, we are requesting, we actually added an additional parking spot, so we're requesting reduced parking count for resident spots of 90, whereas the bylaw requires 105 parking spots.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions by committee to the agent? Seeing none. Anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none. Staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff's evaluated the change to the committee's previous condition with respect to the variance based on the 4 tests under the Planning Act. The staff is recommending approval of the application with the following conditions. 1, that the owner finalize site plan approval under City File SP 18-009, execute a site plan agreement, and post any required financial securities and insurance to the satisfaction of the Director of Development Services. 2, that the requirement for resident parking for any combination of uses permitted in the residential apartment A3, section 2293 zone be calculated at the applicable parking rate in accordance with the zoning bylaw and shall not exceed 105 parking spaces. And finally, Mr. Chair, that failure to comply with and maintain the conditions of the committee shall render the approval null and void. Thank you.
Thank you. So, ma'am, you've had an opportunity to review those conditions?
Yes, I have, and I just actually want to make a note with regards to the second condition. So I guess we're really here because the condition is pretty, I mean, I guess we live and we learn. We accepted the condition previously, and we understand that it's staff's intent to, I guess, really lock in that, you know, the minor variance that we're requesting reflects what's required in the bylaw. However, it really leaves no room for us with like small design changes or marketing changes to, I guess, move forward with the intent of the minor variance without having to come back for a small technicality. So I guess we would ask staff if they would consider a more flexible approach to capping at 105 whereas there's perhaps a percentage deviation that we can, I guess, implement so that in the future, if there are any design changes that are very minor in nature, that we can move forward on the intent of, I guess, the originally approved minor variance application.
Is there only one block left, though? There shouldn't be any, or are there more anticipated structures to be built on the site?
So not on this site. I guess really I'm bringing it up for any future applications that we may bring before you, and just to state on the record that we do find that a very restrictive condition. We have been working with staff, and we're actually, our final site plan submission is imminent for this site. We do have other sites in the area. So I just wanted to bring up at this point that we would appreciate, we do accept it for this site, but in future applications that staff maybe consult or work with us on a more flexible approach to the required parking spaces.
Respecting, I guess, the philosophy.
Yes.
That would be something that during discussions and deliberations with staff, I think they're pretty good to work with, so you can
Yes.
actually bring it up at that point in time. But I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah,
but
I
that
just
doesn't,
wanted to note it.
just for clarity, though,
Yeah.
we're only dealing with this application. Are these conditions acceptable to you? So we need to have that, a yea or nay to that, so we can proceed.
Yes, these conditions are acceptable for this application.
Okay, thank you. Committee members, any questions? If not, motion to approve by Mr. Nurse, with the conditions as included.
Yes.
Seconded by Ms. Doffler. All in favor? That carries.
Thank
That
you.
is approved. You can go rest your voice.
Calling application A19017, Maria Kunti and Trust. The property is located at 10462 Highway 50.
Good morning. This is my first time here, so just patience.
No worries, just take your time.
Thank you. My name's Loredana Kunti. I'm representing my mother and father, Maria Kunti and Carlo Kunti, who is here. And I'm also here with David DeCecco, who is the owner of Greenside Landscaping. We have submitted an application for a minor variance to permit a garden center for a temporary period of 5 years, to permit outdoor storage of materials related to the garden center, and to permit, well, eventually, because there have been 4 accessory structures on the property, but those actually will not be erected for the foreseeable future. And the 4th is to allow a minimum rear yard setback of 28 feet from Coleraine Drive. So this is actually an identical application to the variances approved under application A14005. In fact, this application has been approved we applied in 2001, 2007, 2012, and 2014. So this is our 5th go. We've received the staff report with the recommendations, and I just want to reply to those. So, which I sent a note to Neil Grady, who I believe forwarded on to Bernie Steiger Monday. I don't know if you've had a chance to receive our sort
We
of letter in
haven't
response.
seen, I don't see any comments from you.
Okay, I'll just kind of review. So the first recommendation from staff is that the use be permitted for a temporary period of 2 years. And as you can appreciate, 2 years for a business owner is a very, very short period of time. So we were really hoping for our usual 5-year extension. It's tough for the business owner, but also for my parents as the landlords to kind of, get the time for the tenant. The second condition, that within 180 days of the committee's decision, the owner shall submit a temporary use bylaw application.
I don't know what that means because we haven't had to do that before, so I would like some clarification on that. That it's permitted with the temporary garden center, which is what we would like. It's almost 20 years now. We will not construct any structures unless we obtain a permit. That's acceptable. That the owner shall remove materials in a utility bin. That actually has already been done, and we confirmed that in our letter on Monday. And that's really it. We really are here asking for the 5 years. We understand also that the city and the region are working together to sort of assess the lands, that this is part potentially of a bigger plan for that land. And so we understand those constraints, and we would like to work with the city on that moving forward, and recognize that, you know, there may be some bigger things that develop down the line. If there isn't any progress in the next few years, then hopefully, you know, we can get our extension, or that won't impede us to be able to do what we've been doing and to continue to do it moving forward.
Fair comments. I mean, we'll have staff put their include their comments so we can get some clarity on that. In particular, I guess the temporary use bylaw. I guess I was reading a bit of that as well. So we'll wait till those comments and then we'll proceed. Okay? Unless there's anything else you'd like to include.
Not for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions by committee members to the agent? Seeing none. Is there anyone else in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none. Staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments? Mr. Steiger?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff understand that this use has previously been supported through the committee and also by staff for quite some time. And you know, I don't have the benefit of understanding what sort of the rationale was at that time, but looking at it at this point, it seems that this better fits under the temporary use bylaw provisions of the official plan, which would give you certain criteria to assess this sort of temporary use that's ongoing or has this sort of operation like this, as opposed to trying to assess it under the 4 tests, which in my view actually, you know, create some complications with the intent of zoning bylaw and so desirable for the land and so forth, in particular with the intent of the zoning bylaw section. Therefore, the recommendations as set out here would be to bridge the gap between giving them some time under this variance, because they've been established here and have done this in this process for a while, to extend the use via the variance for a period of time to allow them to make the temporary use bylaw application and achieve the approvals under that process, so that the use can be assessed underneath the temporary use bylaw provisions of the official plan and under that process, as opposed to the minor variance process. There's obviously costs related to the rezoning application effectively, and there's associated costs and so forth with that. The report goes through how some of the things that would be considered as part of that in terms of the impact on the surrounding area and how it's trying to unfold in accordance with the official plan. And is it detrimental in that fact and assessing some of the negative impacts. So there's direct policies related to assessing these types of uses, and that's really this truly is a better fit under the temporary use bylaw provisions and the assessment that would go along with that under such an application and under the official plan. That's why we have that in place under OP in that regard. So the recommendations as have been made in that regard, and that's the reason for the 2 variances, one that this be, or two of the conditions, one being that this be permitted for a period of 2 years, and then that within 180 days they make the temporary use bylaw application. Then the related conditions are sort of technical conditions to allow the use to exist, much like there's, I think, the same conditions effectively as have been previously established, with the difference being number 3, which restricts the variances related to the 3 and 4 related to the setback and to these accessory structures and so forth, only to a garden center to tie it down to that use. Otherwise, it would be a blanket permission on the property. So,
So, Mr.
so
Steiger?
that's the direction of staff, and then, yeah.
Yeah, I guess, I think the fair question would be, trying to get a grasp, because I think what staff is doing is a great game plan, but understanding what this temporary bylaw application would entail to the actual owners and timeframes, costs, like you just mentioned.
Yeah.
So is that something that, I guess, has been gone over, or
We
was
haven't
it
had
just?
a discussion
We
with
haven't
them.
had, so staff and the owners had not having a discussion on that?
No.
So I can understand it as well, is the temporary use application then, as you said, becomes part of the OP temporary amendment for all intents and purposes?
Well, it's a bylaw that gets put in place on the property that allows a use under certain circumstances to exist on the property. What I'm saying is that that's evaluated against the section in the OP, section 510, which speaks specifically to what we look at when we look at temporary use bylaws. And it deals with these scenarios where there's a property that has a zone with a estate residential, which really just permits a house. And now they're proposing a garden center, which there's no related sort of associated type of
But it's been
intent.
going on for X amount of years.
Yeah.
I guess my concern or question would be, because it may be the right decision, as you said, is that there hasn't been consultation. So I would caution in making a decision without all that information. So I don't know if a deferral would be warranted at this point in time, so that they can actually get some information on that. But I guess I'll leave it to committee to ask any other questions. So just so the owners understand, is that there may be benefits in this process in terms of you're not having to come to committee again in 2 years, 3 years. I'm not sure if that's the way it would work. Would they be able to put certain provisions in that temporary, that it's actually a longer use? Is that something that they can look into?
Through the temporary use bylaw, you're only allowed to approve the use for 3 years, and the extensions beyond that at 3-year periods. So the time period is different. It's simply in terms of how we're looking at these uses and a consistency on a citywide basis in terms of what we're assessing as a temporary bylaw versus what's being assessed through a committee of adjustment application, and being able to these are specific provisions put into the ROP, and this type of use is exactly meant to fit that sort of proposal, that sort of aspect. So I have no concerns with the deferral to explain it, and then they can come back and express their concerns or okay
Absolutely.
or whatever it may be.
And
That's fair.
committee members, are there any questions at this point in time? Ms.
Through you,
Toffler?
Mr. Chair, I would just encourage conversation.
Sure.
It might be a little onerous for us to deal with here. We don't know what the implications might be or the further questions might be brought forward.
Thank you. It's a surprise because, as I said, this is our sort of fifth application. Also, the region, Aisha Khan, her recommendation, she has said she has no problem with the extension of the 5 years. So she says there had no objection with the extension of the temporary use of the property for a further 5-year period. To start the process, from what I've just kind of understood today.
Can I just interject 1
Yes.
second? Just my recommendation, but you can continue by all means, is that I think there's a lack of clarity from understanding from your part, which is fair. So I would actually ask for a deferral so that you can get those questions, so that we're not discussing the item further at this point in
Okay.
time. And then we can discuss it once you've gotten all that information as well. And then you can decide to discuss it as is, or at that point in time, you may think that that's a better option or not. I'm not sure. So I just leave it to you, and then I leave it also to committee, though, is that I think it's a good idea to just have this deferred so you're able to get those answers, because this is actually something that I haven't seen in our term, a temporary, as a condition. So it's something that I think would be fair to get some information on.
To find out whether this has been, for instance, applied to other lands as well?
Well, I'm sure it has. I can't speak for staff, but it's just something that I think what they're trying to do, and this is just me speaking, is trying it for it to conform more specifically for the use and ongoing. But to be fair to you, is I think you need to know what the course of action is.
Yes,
If there are,
because it's established business since 2001, so.
Mr. Nurse?
Or an alternative might be to change condition 1 to allow 5 years but leave condition 2 as is, so they get the benefit of being there for 5 years, and potentially if they're successful with the application, there's 3 automatic years.
Absolutely, and I do agree. My only concern that I have with that is that I don't think there's adequate time for them to understand what the temporary use provisions or applications would entail.
That's true, but they get 5 years.
Correct. But you're asking someone to say yes to something that they don't know what's going to be.
I know, but she wants
Absolutely.
5 years.
So,
Okay, so could I, because that was my dad, he just also wanted to mention, so my mother and father also owned the land 10562, the adjacent property, so we do understand about this question of the larger block within the arterial roads and all of that, and that may be why this has been being looked at. But could you please just recap what you were suggesting with regards to the 5 years?
My view is that we could give 5 years, so condition 1, which is now calling for 2 years, you would instead get 5, but we leave condition 2 in.
how would that work, Mr. Steiger, in terms of the whole premise was that it's a 2-year and then it's a 3-year,
Yeah, so
right?
in the end, they would essentially have a dual approval, one through the variance and then one through a zoning bylaw, but.
It's duplication to an
In some
extent.
ways, yeah.
How long does it take? Through your chair.
A bylaw met through the chair of the.
To you, through
Through me to
how
you.
long would that temporary use application processing take?
It may not be that long with regard to this one because there's not really any changes. The zoning bylaw takes a year, but this one you might be able to get through it within 6-8 months, something to that effect.
But essentially, then you'll just have two
You have two
approvals
Yeah.
that are duplicated to an extent.
Yeah. And
we have
the direction here was trying to
Streamline.
trying to bridge the processes, I
Right.
suppose, and switch it to the other process. So.
May I suggest, could we go for a 5-year approval and then have this be like the sort of final 5-year approval under this, and then look at going under the temporary use bylaw application? Because that will give us time to consult over the next couple of years. It will give the city time to reevaluate what they're doing with these lands. And we'll also, I mean, hopefully, because it's an ongoing business
So
discussion.
I guess to
Dual approval doesn't hurt.
Yeah, and no, Mr. Nurse, I do tend to agree is that the only, if that's the case, that committee's will, is then we would strike the 180 days on the temporary use application, and it's within that term they would seek a temporary use application.
Through you, Mr. Chair, then the 5-year period is long and the difference between 180 days and 5 years is quite big.
But that essentially, I think meets you're having an approved process, but it commences the process of, so in the next, before the term is over, they will now seek a temporary use in the bylaw.
Yes, may I just say, because we also may hear from the city that you have this grand plan, especially because, as I said, those 2 lots, it's
Things
quite a
can change.
considerable piece of property.
Yeah.
And they may want us to work together to figure out how to include it in that plan, the secondary plan.
Sure. Ms. Doffler?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just, we've got some comments from the region of Peel. Something that is a bit concerning is the comment that there are significant safety issues and that there are notices of contravention that have been sent without resolution, so can we understand?
Yes,
what that
so
is?
they're talking about, so the notice is, as the landowner, we were not aware of them, but we've heard from Greenside, and they said, for whatever reason, that has been resolved now, so that bin is gone. We have not heard any issues with safety in the past, so again, I'm not sure exactly what they're referring to, but we've not had any input from the region or contraventions on the safety issue. We have had them on the bin, that's now been taken care of. And we confirmed that there will be no bin for the remainder of the 5 years.
This is pertaining to what, disposal bin?
Disposal bin, yes, pertaining to the property, to the running of the landscaping business.
Okay. Well, Mr. Steiger, any comments on that, I guess?
To the chair, on the disposal bin or the?
No,
on the
apologies. Back to where we were talking about the, would that be something that meets, I guess, the intent of the conditions? Because I do agree with Mr. Nurse is that ultimately, obtaining the temporary use application is, if that is the best course, but still giving because, you know, they may get it, absolutely, but again, they're duplicating their costs, they're duplicating things anyway, so why not give them the longer period on the variance and then put the condition in that they will seek that temporary use application?
So we have our recommendation. I mean, that what you're proposing is an option, and I mean, that'll have to be the committee's decision on that. I'm not so certain how you could codify somehow that this will be, no further extensions will be approved. I don't know how.
No, I don't think
that's
that
legally
you're
possible.
100% right. We can't force that, but we can actually put the condition that they will put an application in for the temporary use within that term.
Yeah.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. The 180 days is, like, they need to start that application. It's not that they need to obtain it.
That's right.
Right? So if, as long they're willing to start the process within 180 days, I think 180 days should be fine, or...
The concern that I have is, not even a concern, is that then Mr. Steiger's point is well taken, is that then you're going to have an approval, and then you're gonna have another approval that is just mimicking what you've just approved. So there's no need for it to an extent. So really, truth be told, and this is just my opinion, is that then you just approve the variance, if that's something that we're looking at doing. Or you put, I think this is a good compromise from Mr. Nurse's perspective of initiating the process, but still giving them adequate time. So, I mean, again, it's open to any discussion and any motions that committee would like to put forward. Ms. Doppler?
Through you, Mr. Chair. There seems to be some development occurring further to the north. Probably the property adjacent to yours has a planning sign on it, and then looks like there's residential development underway. Is that part of the staff's reasoning for going for the temporary use application, that there are other
Well, I
factors
think,
entering? Because I
again-
see with the region, they have the concerns with the access. There are 5 arterial roads that they're trying to bring together, so.
So through the chair, I mean, that's part of it, but I think that may seem a little, I think it's just that all those sorts of things are better assessed through because there's provisions related to that and criteria related to that in the official plan for temporary use bylaws, where there's none of those types of things for the 4 tests that we're evaluating these applications on. And just in terms of an appropriate process citywide for all these types of proposals is to deal with these. It's the better approach to deal with them through the temporary use bylaw. I mean, it is a concern. I don't know if, I think the region has indicated within the next 5 years this shouldn't be an issue for this use to be here. I don't necessarily think from the city's perspective that this is an issue for the next 5 years, but so it's more about which process it should be in. I suspect beyond that, yeah, potentially there would be starting to be concerns of how do you fit this in when all the roads are changing and so forth, and other people are trying to develop, and you have this sort of use here. To the north, there's the Orlando piece, which is a little bit further to the north as well, which is a large site for industrial and so forth that they're seeking to move ahead on. So, yeah, the area is changing, and things are probably a bit more imminent than they were, 2014 or earlier. So, those would be part of the criteria, but I think it's more about what the appropriate mechanism is to evaluate this type of request. So.
Can I just make one comment on that? That we completely understand, I say we, representing my parents, obviously, with the two buildings, two lots adjacent to each other. We started this process back in November. I mean, absolutely, we would have applied under that process had we known at the time. So really, it is a lot to ask now for us to go through that process when we could have started it back in October, November, because we've been doing this for now as our fifth go. So it would have been helpful at that point.
And that's why, for that reason, and I'll let you, that's where my mind is, that the 5-year term with the condition of the temporary use bylaw within that term actually is that fair compromise. Is that it allows you then to commence the process, you have your approval for X amount of time, and then you have the choice. Well, not even the choice. We're actually putting it as a condition that you're going to commence it within the 5 years, so that the next go around, it wouldn't be coming through this office. You have the option of going through, through this committee. So, Ms. Doffler?
Through you, Mr. Chair, my thought process on this is the following, whether it's appropriate or not, whether we get agreement, but we do look to see that businesses are not unfairly treated, especially in this case where somebody has been there for such a long period of time. Our problem as a committee, and I'll speak for myself, is I think Mr. Rousseau mentioned it as well, we have not come across a temporary use bylaw application, so we're not familiar with the contents of that. It's at the suggestion of the city, and respectfully we want to honor that. But I think we have two options from my standpoint. One is that we defer this so that there's conversation. I would agree that conversation would have been better had prior to us getting here, but be that as it may, we're at this point. Or secondly, that I would support either a 2-year with an understanding that the temporary use bylaw application is underway within 180 days, and that temporary use will not exclude an extension for 3 years. So one way or the other, somehow we get you the 5 years, but we start to implement a process that the city wants to implement. Or as I said, we just defer this so that the conversation takes place directly with both parties.
I think my father wanted to say,
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to say, my name is Carlo Cundi. Me and my wife, we own the property next door to this property. This property we bought about 20 years ago. On the property, I have a woodworking plant adjacent to this. I've been there since 45 years. The only that I know this property very good. We ended up buying 20 years ago. It was occupied by Roma fence. So really it was a yard with all the fence material in, and we cleaned them up. And then the gentleman here, he approached us that he wants to open a little garden center there, and we came to the committee of adjustment, and we had no problem. The biggest problem I have right now, and I have to come in to the city and we have to discuss this, because I'm 74 years old. My son was running this business, was helping me going on this business. He died last year of a heart attack. He was 50 years old. My situation is, I had a surgery on December the 5th on my heart, so I have to see the specialist now in 2 months. And the reason is, I have to come in. A little was not a mistake, but I call it a mistake, was made 45 years ago. I purchased this property with my partners. We moved it in, and then the bylaw officer came and said, "What you guys are doing here?" I said, "Well, we're working." He said, "You're not supposed to work here." I said, "Sir, we have moved from Weston to here. We are working. And next thing you know, but this property is commercial or industrial. And we end up to be at the meeting with Mr. Dalzell 40 years ago, the plan 45 years ago. Why we're having this meeting, in order not to waste time to come into the comedy adjustment and the application, it came that, what do you do? Well, I said, I'm a woodworker. And one of the planner, I think we could have been Mr. Dalzell himself or Mr. Oh my God, the name I don't quite get him anymore. At that time, Mr. Robertson used to be the councilor, and then he ended up to be the mayor. I made one of the members at the meeting said, what about, they give me a list, I have the original, what I would have done on my property. You know, like manufacturing, they didn't want no tires, they didn't want no, and one of the, whoever was the gentleman, he suggests, you know what, you don't have to stop working. What happens if you're going to ask, what do you need it for? I said, for woodworker. One of them said, do you have any objection that this plant will be turned for woodworking only? And I said, no, I'm a woodworker. Will you believe we needed an adhesion, and we had to go back to the city. Eventually, we got the adhesion because it says, I have a bylaw, the existing building should be for a woodworking plant only. And but then we discussed, they gave me the adhesion, no problem. My biggest problem right now, as I said, I hope I keep the garden center for the 5 years, but the biggest one will be I cannot handle my business anymore. I have no grandchildren interested in the business. I'm trying to sell the business. And I understand that rezoning the old block, I always collaborated with the city for 45 years. I never received a contravention or whatever. I had good times and bad times. Mr. Robertson, which was the mayor, he was a council at that time. We had difficulty for the money, paying tax, because we went from 45 employees since 1977. From right now, I only have 2 employees. And I have to come to the city, say, please, I cannot run a 45,000 square feet building in the condition that I am. God took my son. I want them to help me. What can I do while in this building, before selling this woodworking plant, while they're rezoning everything? I do understand that they're rezoning the old block, which is very nice. I have no objection to that. But please, I hope that I don't have so much time either. That this is what. So really, if we have the 5 years and the city develops the old block, we'll be fine. I don't think they can do it before 5 years. I always collaborated with the region, with the bylaw officer, I tried whatever I could, you know, being 45 years. But now, unfortunately, I'm 74 and I'm not conditioned to run the business. And I got to do something.
Well, we appreciate the time you put in.
Thank you so much. I will come back to the city soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to add, I completely appreciate the comments and the suggestions. As I've said, it's really hard for a business to sort of operate for only 2 years. And I'm hoping that we can have the approval for 5 years. I absolutely can commit to coming in and opening the discussion with staff to talk about the plan for the overall plan. And I just want to note, I mean, if I look at what's happened in other decisions, for instance, the karate school, just listening, it is hard for a landowner to only, you know, give a couple of years. And in this case, we've had to come back, and we've never asked really for a blanket extension. You know, it's sort of over $2,000 every time, and that's fine. We're willing to keep doing it. But I think now being asked to pay our application and go through the process and then start a new process, it's really, and given what my dad just said about where we're at is like a family business, it would be very helpful if we could have the approval. I commit to coming in and discussing. We've absolutely at all times complied with all the conditions that have been put on us. And I think it's really hard for the garden center. I mean, this process could be 7-8 months. That's an entire season. I mean, we have a very short Canadian summer. So, and it's hard also to sort of, within the 180 days, how does Dave here operate, you know, on ongoing or with the uncertainty. And we as the landlord.
Understood. Mr. Chada?
I do agree with Mr. Nurse's suggestion.
Okay, well, let's put a motion forward if we, my suggestion on that motion though would be to waive the 180 days, just so that, there is not duplication in terms of even costs and so forth absorbed, but an actual, fact that they do come forward with the temporary use bylaw, perhaps putting in that they have to come in, 6 months, minimum 6 months prior to the lapse of the 5 years. But again, I leave it open to committee. A year? So that, sorry,
So the condition 1 would versus 2 years, 5 years.
mhm.
Condition 2, that would change, that they'll come in and initiate that application within 1 year prior to the end.
Okay.
So within, at 48 months.
So do you understand, ma'am,
Yes,
what we're
yes,
actually
yes.
suggesting?
We can agree with that, 1 year before. So at 4 years, we'll have to apply to the, we'll have to start the progress, yes.
So essentially, it's, again, you would have to start looking at that if there was a variance gonna be sought. You may not be looking at it a year in advance, but this then commences the process that you can, you would have to put in an application within a year of the finale of the 5-year term,
Okay.
okay?
And I'm assuming by then, hopefully, we may have also heard from the city with regards to their plan for the,
That, I guess, will be ongoing discussions. I mean, it's, I don't think any of us are clairvoyant, but I think
Okay.
that it's an ongoing process, that area is in transition for sure. But as you stated, it may be a year, it may be 6 years. I don't think anyone has unless there's something that's in the queue, Mr. Steiger, anything upcoming.
Well, I mean, the work on the EAs, I mean, that'll trigger everything that goes on in that area, so that's really what is evolving, quite frankly.
Okay.
okay.
So, would you like to put that in a form of a motion, Mr. Nurse?
Yeah, so motion to support the application with amendments to condition 1 and 2. So rather than 2 years, change to 5 years, the permitted use. And condition number 2, that at 48 months into the current period, that the temporary use bylaw application would be submitted.
Okay. Is that fair?
Yes.
Staff, is that the wording adequate?
No, there's no 180 days.
Ms. Myers?
It's just, we have basically 4 years.
I'm not sure about the wording for condition number 2 as amended.
If I may just offer a suggestion, based on my notes, I would recommend you suggest that prior to 1 year before the expiry of the committee's decision, the owner shall submit a temporary use bylaw application.
Fair. Okay, so that's the motion put forward by Mr. Nurse?
Yeah.
You have a seconder? Seconded by Mr. Chada. All in favor? That carries. That is approved with the amended conditions. 1 to read for 5 years, and then number 2, that within a year of expiry, temporary use application will be submitted.
Thank you. And that means that we won't have to apply for a minor variance application. We're only doing the one.
Well, I guess within that,
Yes.
in that year prior, you
Yes.
would put in, and at that point, discussions with staff, you can go forward at that, because who knows, by that point, there may be a full rezoning that is commenced.
Thank you. Thanks
Right.
so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Calling application A18-132, properties located at number 9 Ocean Avenue under the ownership of Pulte.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jaspreet Hoti. I'm the owner of 9 Ocean Avenue, or one of the owners. So I'm here to talk about this application. The application was to allow a below-grade entrance in the side yard of the house. We started this process back in August, September. And the city engineer pointed out an issue with drainage, and I've been working with the city staff, and my engineer has been in touch with them as well. So at this point, I'm happy to say that we have a resolution. I'm thankful to the city staff for working with me and my engineer to come up with a viable option. So basically, the engineer has come up with a drainage plan, which he has given an engineer's letter for. I've gotten the staff recommendation. I've seen the conditions, and they are acceptable to me.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions by committee members to the owner?
Just a comment for you, Mr. Chair. I recall this application came a few months back and there was a negative staff report based on at that time, but I commend staff and the owner. They both worked together for a number of months and they come to this solution, and I'm happy to support staff recommendation when the time will come.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none, we do have a letter, I guess, to be submitted for the record. It's a letter of, I guess, support, a letter of non-objection. That's just to be included in the record. I don't know if we have any other correspondence because this is an older file, but if it is, it will be submitted in the record as required. Staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff have considered the proposed variances based on the 4 tests of minor variance, and based on the review, staff recommends approval subject to following conditions being imposed. 1, that the variances only be approved to the extent identified on the sketch attached to the public notice. 2, that the owner obtain a building permit for the below grade entrance within 60 days of the date of the decision of the committee. 3, that the owner construct a 2-step change in grade and 2 exterior stairways that provide one means of access to both the front yard or rear yard of the property through the side yard. 4, that the below grade entrance shall not be used to access an unregistered second unit. And 5, that failure to comply with and maintain the conditions of the committee shall render the approval null and void.
Thank you. So, sir, you've mentioned that you've read the conditions and they are agreeable to you?
That's right.
Okay. If there are no further questions or comments, seeking a motion to proceed. Motion to approve with stated conditions by Mr. Nurse, seconded by Ms. Doffler. All in favor? That carries. The application is approved, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Calling application A18171, Yazpadam and Joni Varakala. The property is located at 25 Vivaldi Crescent.
Good morning, sir. I'm Yasupadam Varakala.
Morning.
Yes, my application is A18171. Sir, I'm here to request you for the date because my wife is not here with me.
Can I just get your name, sir, and address for the record, please?
Sir, my name is Yasupadam Varakala. My application A18171.
Okay. Are you the owner or the agent?
Yes, sir, I'm owner.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm here to request you, sir, for the date because my wife is not here. She is not well.
Okay, so, sir, you're asking for a deferral on this?
Defer the date, sir.
Okay. That I had asked that at the beginning of the meeting. You could have at that point in time brought that forward. I don't know if you were present at that time. So you're asking for a deferral on this application based on what? Your wife is unable to attend?
Yes, sir, she's not here. She's not well.
And you are looking for a date of when, sir?
No, maybe April 1st week, sir.
Sorry?
April 1st week or March ending.
Through you, Chair. There's a date on March 26th, maybe something in the middle of April.
Okay.
Middle of April.
Committee members, any questions or?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I do recall when this application came before, and again, my apologies, I think there was somebody sick in your family, out of country, someone was?
Yes, sir. My mother was not well. She fell down and she was hospitalized. And we had been to there, and meanwhile we got married, my daughter also. Now again, my mother she's in the hospital only. She's not well.
Okay.
I may be traveling back, or I may not be traveling, but my wife is also sick here.
Okay.
Yeah.
You will, I guess, consider your deferral request. I do just ask as a question, Have you had an opportunity to review and look at the actual staff recommendations?
Sir,
You have had an opportunity to?
yes, sir.
Okay, just because, I mean, I'm looking at it and they're relatively positive, so if you would, is that something that you would want to consider or still requesting the deferral request?
I just want to have for the date, sir. I'll come back with my wife.
That's fine. Staff, any issues with the deferral request?
Mr. Chair, we don't have any issue with the deferral request.
Okay.
Chair, I have no issue supporting the deferral request, but just to the applicant, sir, I do understand and I'm fully sympathize with you, but you're pretty much getting what you're looking for in this staff report.
There are some changes, absolutely. So that being said, we'll, if
Like, I meant to say, as you said, like, it's
Understood.
relatively good.
Yeah, so, if committee is, if it's committee's will, seeking a motion to proceed with the deferral request.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify, does the owner have an understanding that he is entitled to proceed without his wife being present? Just want to make sure he understands that we don't require every property owner to be in attendance.
You understand that it's, you, if you wish, you could proceed, but you're asking at this point in time to defer.
Yeah, I can do that, sir, but right now I want to have it for the date, and I'll come back to you again.
Okay, so, committee members, I leave it to you for, a motion.
Motion to defer this application for March 26th.
Okay, seconded by Ms. Stoffler. All in favor? That carries. This is deferred to March 26th, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Sir, are you here for this,
Yes, I'm the adjoining neighbor.
okay?
May I approach?
Yes, please.
My name is Ramchan.